I am not a podium person, so I'm just going to be down here. And I hope that's okay with everybody. We have a lot of material to cover. So as we go on, please ask questions as we go. And if I miss you, just like raise your hand higher. I think I've taken the microphone for the question, so sorry about that. So I want to tell you a little bit first.
No.
Oh yeah, I gotta go back here. There we go. There we go. All right. So I know there's a lot of people in different stages of life. And so I invite you to just think about what stage you're in, what stage your loved one is in. I've divided it into 4 stages. There's really birth to 3, where you're in early intervention. There's the school age years where you're thinking about IEPs and then starting to think about the transition to adulthood. There is adulthood, where you're then thinking about possibly the transition to supported or independent living. And then there is, when parents go to Mars and you're thinking about how that person is living on their own. And one of the questions that I get very often is it too early? Is it too late for me to start planning? And I would say wherever you stand, wherever you fall here, you're not too early and you're not too late. Now is the best time to do it. And also leave any shame or shoulds at the door, because we're all doing our best and surviving. And whatever you have done is what you should have been doing. And just start from there. So a little bit about myself. My name is Kristin Carleton. I have been in financial services for 20 plus years. I've been a financial planner for more than 10. And what brought me to special needs planning was the birth of my son. He's 4. He has complete ACC. And when I received his diagnosis, this is really a full circle moment for me. I was 19 weeks pregnant, going through a routine growth scan, and they shuffled me off to the maternal fetal medicine doctor, who then said, "You've got to get an MRI right away." And I'll never forget the radiologist. He was like, "I'm not supposed to see patients, but my husband is a physician. He's a rheumatologist." And he was like, "Well, physician to physician." And he was super science nerd, like the guy who never talks to patients, He's like, "This is so crazy. You won't believe it. He's missing this whole entire part of his brain. It's all gone." And I was like, "That's my son." And my husband's like, "Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you very much." And we both went home completely shell-shocked. Like, what does this mean? And one of the first things that I found was the Facebook group. And Heather Will, who I actually have not had the chance to meet in person yet, got me into one of the age groups. And that was just life-changing for me. I mean, to go from Google, which gives us nothing but bad news, to a group that said, "Your son's going to tell you who he's going to be, and we're going to be here to support you every step of the way," was really, really incredibly meaningful to me. And I'm just so extremely grateful. I actually just got to meet Bruce Barge, who was another person that I met on Facebook through this group. And it's just so wonderful that we're able to make those connections. So I hope to give a little bit back today. And if you ever need help or you have a question, please lean on me as a resource. I really want to be there for you. So as I look at special needs planning, the process that I take people through is I want to make sure that your family is cared for, that you're protected, and that you have room for growth. And when you boil that down, what we're really saying is we want to keep somebody benefits eligible, but we also want to make sure that they're living the best possible life that they can. And the reality is that those two things can sometimes be in conflict with each other. And that's a terrible reality, but it is one that with planning can be overcome somewhat. It's not perfect. We have a long way to go. Advocacy is a really big part of what I do on a local level, on a state level, on a national level. I live in Richmond, Virginia, so I do go up to DC and do some advocating there as well. And I just joined the board of Commonwealth Savers, which is the Able Now program. And they're the largest ABLE program in the country. So the point of me being on that board is to bring positive changes to ABLE, to our community. So we really want to put together a plan that allows your family to live your best lives. So that's what we all want, right? Every single person in the family. And one of the things that when people come to me, they're often just thinking of their loved one with a disability. And I really encourage them to say, let's look at every single family member. Don't forget about yourself. Put your oxygen mask on. And also look at your other children. And I see both sides. I have some people come and they say, well, I'm not going to worry about it, and I'm going to split things equally between my children, and that's just the way it's going to be. And I encourage people to look and say, it's not about equal, it's about equitable. Let's figure out what each person needs, and then let's go from there. So I learned by example. I'm going to tell you about the Smith family. So we have Sam, Jana, and George. And Sam is 22 and has autism, lives with mom and dad. And they're just really starting the process, not exactly sure what to do. So when I talk about a care plan, we're really looking at how do you access funding, right? Are you using all of the available funding that's out there? And this is another thing that I hear really often is, well, we have money and we don't need government benefits, so we're not going to worry about it. That might be true. The cost of care usually over a lifetime is millions of dollars. And some benefits are not available unless you actually have a Medicaid waiver. So if you're somebody that could benefit from a Medicaid waiver, the last thing that you want to do is say to your loved one, like, you can't have that service because you don't have the Medicaid waiver. So just think about that. The other part of this is SSI, SSDI, making sure that you understand how that fits into your family's plan. You're also looking at a financial plan. And when you're thinking about a financial plan, it's really looking at what's the cost of care of your loved one. And when I think about this, I think not just, what are you paying out of pocket, but like, what are the paid and unpaid supports that are being provided to your loved one with a disability? And if you're not there, who will do them? And if it is that you need to pay for somebody to do those things, I think of my own son, like, no one can cut his nails but me. It's just a fact. He's very, very, very sensory sensitive. And we have to go through like a whole song and dance rigmarole routine. The stars have to line up. The moon has to be in the right orbit. And then maybe we get nails cut or filed. So thinking about those things as you're putting together your financial plan, calculating that cost of care, but then you're also looking at beneficiaries, because to keep someone benefits eligible, you have to have something called a special needs trust, which I'm also going to cover in the protect portion. So we're really looking, and don't forget about taxes. If no one's talking to you about taxes, there are a lot of medical deductions. I met with a family where they were in the school age system and they were paying out of pocket for private school. it was a private school that was needed for the specific supports, and they were not taking it as a deduction. And it was tens of thousands of dollars that they could have saved over that time. So if you're paying for things like day support that are not covered by Medicaid services, it's things like those where being tax efficient really makes a big difference. When you're looking at your estate plan, there are also tax implications there. So there are new laws about leaving retirement vehicles to a special needs trust that your attorney needs to be aware of when they're writing the trust for you. And you really need to go through and look at what assets you have and what makes sense to leave to the trust versus spending, et cetera. So having a plan can really make a significant difference. So when you're thinking about how to care for your family, think about how much does it cost to care for your special needs loved one? Again, those paid and unpaid supports. How much are you going to need in retirement? Again, put your own oxygen mask on because you do have to retire. And I meet with a lot of families who say, well, I'm just going to work until I'm dead because we need the money. And that almost never works. So have a plan, look at it. It also is often not true. So get a real diagnosis is the wrong word, but get a real opinion, sit down with somebody and know what you're looking at there. And do you have any gaps? Because if there are gaps in funding, there are tools that you can use to fill those gaps. So I want to do a spotlight on the ABLE account here because this is one of the best tools that we have available to us in this world. So ABLE is a federally created program, and it is available in all 50 states. It is administered by the state, but you can use any other state's program. Some states have some tax benefits going to putting deductions in the ABLE account, some don't. Depending on the state that you are in, there may or may not be a Medicaid payback provision. Virginia does not have a Medicaid payback provision. There are some states that do. This is another one of those advocacy things where we're working on getting that, but this is the big deal. So your loved one with a disability can have one ABLE account. It's in their name. It does not impact their eligibility for government benefits. You or they can put up to $18,000 a year. And if they're working and don't have access to an employer-sponsored savings plan, they can even put more than $18,000 a year. You can direct deposit supplemental security income or SSDI into there. And balances up to $100,000 do not impact government benefits. Above $100,000, you'll lose eligibility for SSI, supplemental security income. And then above that, it goes by the state's limit as to how much money that you can have in there. There's investments in the options in there. Now, you do have to be diagnosed with a disability before the age of 26. Most of our community is in that category, not all. But the other beauty of the ABLE account is that the person with a disability has access to those funds themselves and can spend it on what they see fit. So this is a big deal because as you're doing estate planning, if you're setting up a special needs trust, your loved one with a disability cannot access any funds in a special needs trust directly. They have to go through a trustee. And that goes back to the original where I started from, saying we want to keep someone benefits eligible, but we also want them to be living their best life, right? And being able to make your own decisions is a part of that. Having control of some funding is a part of that. And so a lot of the planning that I do is showing people, whatever your thoughts on the ABLE are, if you're living in a state that does a payback provision, you don't like that, that's, we can work through that. But let's set up the ABLE account because it can be used to provide that independence. So you can put money in there. Your loved one can actually have a debit card where they can spend on their own, as long as it's a qualified disability expense. And almost everything is a qualified disability expense. Then they can use it. The money in the ABLE account does accumulate tax-free. When you take it out, you don't pay taxes. So the tax benefit in my mind is actually one of the smaller benefits of this account. It's really that it keeps you benefit eligible and you don't have to be under that $2,000 resource limit. Absolutely. Sure, absolutely. So what it means is if you're receiving government benefits and you have the ABLE account, so if you have a Medicaid waiver or you're just on traditional Medicaid and you have the ABLE account, you pass away. At the time that you pass away, let's say there's $60,000 in that ABLE account, the government comes in and says, well, like over your lifetime, we spent $125,000 on you. Those are not real numbers at all. But they say, well, so you had 60,000, we spent more than that. So we just take the money in that account and now it's ours. Please. It is. Yep. Of course. Sure. So each state, and not every state has an ABLE program, but the ones that they do, it's run by the 529 programs in that state. So in Virginia, it's PNC Bank. There's different banks that are affiliated where the actual custody of the funds is, but you would go through 529. If you don't want to go through 529, you can actually go through different investment managers will have the ability to do an ABLE account. So there's ABLE America, which is run by American Funds, where you could go directly to them. Generally, I find the state's programs are a little bit better. They offer better benefits than, and this is coming from a financial advisor. So here, if you go through ABLE America, you can go through your financial advisor and they can get paid. If you go directly to the 529, the financial advisor cannot get paid. But you go through ABLE America, you can't get access to a checkbook, you can't get access to a debit card. It's just not as robust of a product. Great question.
One of the limits eligibility if it's able versus employed, for example, $40,000 a year, are they eligible for this kind of an account?
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's no income limit on an ABLE account. Now, that's not to say what you couldn't do is, let's say you're making that $40,000 and you're going to put $18,000 a year into the ABLE account. You can't take that $40,000 and subtract the 18 and say, oh, well, I actually made 28,000 or 22,000 because I put 18,000. So now I'm under the limit and I qualify for government benefits. It doesn't work that way. But it's not. Exactly. There are, from state to state, there are some different state tax deductions depending on what state you're in. But there's no federal tax deduction for making a deduction into the ABLE account. Exactly. Exactly. So some of the things that we're working on are increasing the tax deductions that are available and also making it so that you could put more than 18,000 in a lump sum, kind of similar to the 529 to say, oh, somebody got an inheritance, it was $60,000. rather than making them open up a first party special needs trust where they lose control of the money. Let's let them put 60,000 into the ABLE. I hope that's coming. Depending on the state. Yeah. So the question was in regards to the Medicaid clawback, if money was spent from Medicaid to the beneficiary, that the money would automatically be taken back at their death. And that answer is it depends on the state. So there are some states where there is a clawback. There are some states where there is not. So you really need to be aware. And it's based on where you reside, your residency, not the state of the ABLE account that you're using. Mm-hmm. Yep. Depending on if that person had their own decision-making capacity or had someone else's, they would either name their own beneficiary or it would go by the laws. Oh, sorry. So yes and no. I would put some funds, I would keep the majority like that you're looking to invest for growth in the trust. Yes, I would put money into the ABLE that's spending. Kind of like if you're thinking about your own, you keep everything that's bearing interest in a savings account, move just enough over into your checking to pay your bills. I would look at it the same way. I'm so sorry you've had. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's a huge issue. The good news is that not just on the ABLE, but that whole idea that we have not seen increases in way longer than, yeah, it's terrible. It's definitely on my radar and something that advocates across the country are focused on. It does, yes. So, and the investment options do vary based on what program that you're doing. In general, the first $2,000 that you're in are just in a traditional bank account that's making very little interest. And then after that $2,000, you can invest. You can invest in a money market. You can invest in asset allocation funds, get some stocks, get some bonds in there. Mm-hmm.
You're 529 for your child, but your child may not end up going to college.
Yep.
And that money then you transfer into an ABLE account or into a specialty trust. I mean, what is the role in that? Because, you know, you thought maybe, but, or you didn't know.
Yeah. It's a great question. So $18,000 a year can be transferred from the 529 to the ABLE until December of 2025. And then they're closing that off and saying no more.
Did you say?
Sure. So the question was, what if you've been saving to a traditional 529, and now it has become apparent that college is not going to be an option? Can you transfer the money from the 529 to the ABLE account? And the answer is yes, 18,000 a year through December 2025. And then they're not allowing that anymore. Now, this is again something that could change. There could be legislation that passes that opens that back up again. But as of right now, that's set to end December 2025. Yeah. Federal. Yeah. Now, the 529 can be used for all education related expenses. It can be used for job training. And and you can also transfer it to a different family member. But I do still think they've got to open that up. Yeah. A lot of questions on ABLE. This is awesome. Any more before I move on? Sure. Yes. Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can open up an ABLE account anywhere. It won't change if you're in a state that has a clawback, it won't change those provisions, but you can definitely take advantage of the ABLE program. So like Washington State offers a checkbook, Virginia offers a debit card. I think all of them should offer the same. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, here's what I'll tell you. And I have a bias because I literally just joined the board of Commonwealth Savers, which is Virginia. They have the largest ABLE account. Virginia does. And in the board meeting I just went to, they actually had a self-advocate come, and he gave a wonderful report saying, hey, I'm saving for a home, and the investment options that you have are not adequate for me to save for a home, like not allowing me to take enough risk. And yeah, and so they listened to it, and now we're looking at that to add that as an investment option. Except the taxes. Yes, I agree with everything you said except the taxes. And depending on if you've got a special needs trust set up that has its own tax ID, it is taxed at the highest tax rate out there. So that is a major drawback. And now you have a trustee, and you have to think through who that trustee is. And the corporate trustee is incented to not pay out the funds because they're making money off of it. So it's just an inherent conflict of interest. But in general, from an pure investment perspective, you can always have more options within the trust. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sure. Perhaps, yeah. The question was, if you're looking just for the best investment option, then it would just make sense to have all of your investments inside the special needs trust and very little in the ABLE account. Given that the investment options are not as robust in the ABLE, and given that there is the Medicaid clawback in some states. And I said, like apples to apples, yes, that's true. But there are other variables such as taxes, because trusts are usually taxed at the highest trust tax rate. And that is not great. That is not true in the ABLE. So you can avoid taxes. And of course, when you go through the trust, you have to go through a trustee. So there's access to the funds, there's the investment options, there's the taxes. But there's lack of flexibility on the investments within the ABLE for sure, and the Medicaid clawback. It's a great question. So the question was, can funds from an ABLE account be used to fund education just like a 529? And the answer is yes, they can be. for that person. So an ABLE cannot be transferred from an ABLE account to another family member's 529. So you lose that flexibility. You also on the 529, you have the ability to kind of lump sum a large amount at once. You can't do that in the ABLE. It's 18,000 a year. That's it. So those are the drawbacks there. Great question. Mm-hmm. So the question is, right, so he's got a special needs trust for his son set up that's not funded. And he's asking if there are other vehicles besides the ABLE where he can save money for his son. And not a 529. And I'm assuming that you're also wanting to keep him benefits eligible. Okay. So the answer is no. You've got the ABLE or you've got the special needs trust. Yeah. All right. I'm going to take 2 more questions on ABLE and then try to move on. Okay. Yes.
You said 100K.
Mm-hmm. No. So SSDI, there's no income limit and there's no asset limit for receiving SSDI. It's a great question. So, and for those of you that don't know, after 2 years of receiving SSDI, whether on their own record or a parent's record, someone is then eligible for Medicare. So once you've got the Medicare covering the medical, if they're not, don't use a Medicaid waiver, then you don't have to do some of the complex benefit planning that you would otherwise. So it's a great question. All right, we got one more. Who's gonna ask the one more? Yes. Just a proven diagnosis. Yeah, that's a great question. So her question was, do you have to be designated as disabled by Social Security in order to be eligible for an ABLE account? And the answer is no. You can take a doctor's diagnosis. So I'm actually going to skip some of the example stuff because we've fallen a little bit behind. Wonderful questions. So after we've looked at caring for a family, we then look at protect. And protect is really look at life insurance. We're looking at those gaps that were uncovered from the financial plan and what are the tools that are available. And insurance can be a great one, but it's also really looking and saying, hey, it's not just the gaps, right? In our families, we're just more vulnerable. So the same thing happens to a traditional family. It's devastating. In our families, it can be twice as devastating. Loss of income, early death. These things are things we have to be more prepared for, just because there's more people counting on us, and it's not just for our retirement, it's for an entire other lifetime after that, right? So looking at disability insurance, and this is not me just trying to sell you a policy, like maximize what you have. So if you've got employee benefits, look at those employee benefits because that's often the cheapest that you can find those, and then see what's offered there and then see if you need to supplement it. So look at your disability insurance, make sure that you've got a good umbrella policy. And that's through like your auto and home insurance, get an umbrella policy, and then look at life insurance for your family. And then let's talk about legal, because legal protections are really, really important as well. And when you're looking It's estate planning, it's decision-making support, and it's making sure that every member of your family is protected and that your estate is doing what it's supposed to do. Can't tell you how many times I sit down with families and they have thought that they were doing all of the right things. They went and they paid an attorney a lot of money to put together legal documents for them and then did not change a single beneficiary. And so their legal documents accomplished nothing. So make sure that you're actually sitting and going through the entire process. And then also make sure that your legal documents say what you think they say. That is the other most common thing that I see in families is they think that their legal documents say X, but they actually say Y. They think that they updated the documents to take their sister out as alternate guardian, but they actually didn't. So lives change, things change. Make sure you're getting those documents out every 5 years at least, and taking a look and reading and making sure that they say what they're supposed to say. And I touched on this before, but taxes are really, really important. And with the Secure Act, you want to make sure if you've got a retirement vehicle that you've got language in the trust that mentions the Secure Act. And I'm sorry, you had a question. Mm-hmm.
Getting insurance, life insurance, have your job, you lose your job, you might not have life insurance.
Yep.
You need to sound your plan. My thought was, you might want a policy outside of work as well. Mentioning that I'm going to be qualified. Do you have any comments around that?
So I completely agree. I always say, like, start with what your job offers, get those policies and actually take a look and see some life insurance policies, those group term life insurance are convertible, meaning if you lose your job, they give you the option to convert outside of that. Some are not. Disability insurance, same thing. So just make sure that you know what you have and then look to fill gaps. Because you're exactly right. If you lose that job, you might lose it. And then if you can't go through medical underwriting at the point you lose a job, you can never get insurance again. So just make sure that you know what you have, see what you can afford, and then try to protect your family the best you can. It's a great question. In your trust. Yep. And for that, you really want an elder law attorney. There are a lot of attorneys out there who are going to tell you that they know how to do a special needs trust, and they're pulling out a template from a software and they have no idea what they're doing. And you really, really, really want an elder law attorney to do this. Somebody who is practicing this and who's going day in and day out, who's actually attended a training that tells them the Secure Act really changed this. And if you've got a retirement vehicle, you want to put it in there. But I think any military families in this room? No, I see one. Military families, if you have a pension, you can name a survivor benefit to that pension where your special needs child actually receives that survivor benefit for their entire life. And they will allow you to create a first party special needs trust to put that pension in to keep them benefit eligible. So that's relatively new. It's happened over the last couple of years. But you have to have that first party special needs trust. You can't go into a third party special needs trust, and it has to be in place before you pass away. So there's just a lot of things like that where either start with a planner like me who knows their way around this and then can point you in the direction of the attorney, or find an elder law attorney who really can walk you through it. Because here's why, and I don't want to go too far into this because it's very complicated, but if you have an IRA and you leave it to a trust, a special needs trust, and you don't have any language in there, then you can't stretch out that benefit over their lifetime. So the trust actually has to draw all the money out of that IRA within 10 years, paying much, much higher tax rates. And if it's really not done correctly, it could force it so that that withdrawal has to be done either immediately or in 5 years. And that's just not something you want to do. So again, just make sure that you've got an attorney who knows the Secure Act, who is an elder law attorney, and then also look at your assets from a tax efficiency perspective and see what should be left where. So it's just a highlight. We talked about this a little bit, but it's a first party versus a third party special needs trust. And when you are creating trusts, both of these keep your person benefits eligible. A first party is literally the assets belong to the person themselves, and they are putting them into the special needs trust to stay benefits eligible. These are used often when there's settlement agreements. These are used often when there's pensions, and the pension will allow the trust to be named as the beneficiary. These are also used often when there's an accidental inheritance. And the thing about an accidental inheritance, because I also hear people say, well, it won't matter, right? Because they'll just get the money from me if I've screwed up, and they'll put it into the first party trust. But look, I live in Virginia, and if you're on the developmental disability waiver and you get knocked off that waiver, it could be 25 years before you get back on it. And that is something that, you get, it's a wait list. There's a wait list. Yeah. Which is a bigger systemic issue than I can address right now. But yeah, so you don't want somebody to lose their spot on a waiver, especially if they live somewhere where they're happy, and now they could lose their chance to live there if they're not on the waiver. So the first party trust really is not a great fallback. The third party trust is created by somebody who is not the person, and the third party allows you to name beneficiaries, so you stay in control of the money. The first party trust is the person themselves putting the money in, and then when they pass away, the government comes in and takes the money at that point. So this is another tool that I really love. And as I talk through estate planning, you'll hear me say a lot that when you have a trustee, you have a trustee who's making money decisions. And if you have a trusted family member, that's wonderful. Family members can also have conflicts of interest. So we just see this a lot, right? You have a sibling or a relative who's the trustee, and when money gets involved, they're starting to say no to decisions that really would benefit somebody, because they're thinking, well, I'm next in line. I'll get this money if I don't spend it on them. So they don't need a vacation. So there's a conflict of interest, I think, sometimes with family members. There's a conflict of interest sometimes with corporate trustees. There's protections that you can put in place to make sure that doesn't happen. One is, in your trust, you can put something called a trust protector. And that trust protector, their job literally is to make sure that that trustee is doing their job. You can also put what's called a care committee, and that care committee can be a group of people appointed to check in and make sure that the day-to-day life of your loved one is going well. I take that a step further. I love something called a microboard. A microboard is it's literally an entity usually set up as a nonprofit or a non-stock corporation for the benefit of one person. So there's no tax benefit to it, and I generally recommend you don't have the microboard managing any money, but their job really is to meet at least every year and be trained on your loved one, what they love to do. And you can write language into the trust that says, hey, as long as this microboard is active, you're going to go to the microboard when big decisions are being made or money is going to be sent out. So example I like to give is, hey, the trustee all of a sudden gets a request for a large amount of money. for Sam to go to Paris. And they're like, well, this is $50,000. And then they kind of look into it. Somebody that doesn't know Sam says, oh, Sam's got this girlfriend. And, I don't know, that seems really fishy. We're not going to give the money. And they say no. Well, now what if you have a microboard and the microboard, the trustee calls the microboard and says, hey, we just got this $50,000 request. Sam really wants to go to Paris. What do you think about this? And the microboard says, actually, Sam's been dreaming about this trip for 15 years. He's been dreaming about it. He's got a vision board. His girlfriend and him have planned the entire thing. They do need a lot of extra supports to make this happen. But if the money is there and it's not an issue, we really think he should go on this trip. That's a difference microboard can make. I think that's a great question. So it does not have to be just family. It could be friends, could be therapists that have developed relationships or teachers. My long-term vision is to have a national organization where there are professionals who volunteer their time in order to staff these microboards. So, and that is something I've put the seeds in place to start that going. So that there would be attorneys, there would be financial advisors, there would be people from different therapists, walks of life, social workers that would gather for microboards annually. No. Yeah, it would be volunteer. Great question. Okay, so decision-making support, this is another big one. So when you're thinking about decision-making support for a loved one, this is really important. When your loved one turns 18, if you do not have something in place, you do not have the right to any information about them ever. So that includes if they are in a car accident, it includes medical information, it includes, it is across the board. They are an adult and you do not legally have the right to any information whatsoever. I have seen this come into place. One of my clients, her son had an eating disorder and he was at school and he was hospitalized for a month. She'd not heard from him and nobody called her. And he could not verbally communicate. So this is critically important at the very, very least, put a power of attorney in place because the power of attorney gets you access to that information. There is a tool that you might have heard a lot about. It's called supported decision-making. I think supported decision-making is the wave of the future. I think that's where we're headed. I think that that really gives the person with a disability the say that they want and need over their future. There are drawbacks today with supported decision-making. Supported decision-making. It is unfortunately not recognized in a court of law. So you're going to hear a lot of people and a lot of advocates saying this is the only tool you should use. And I just think you need to know it's not currently recognized in a court of law. It's also very difficult if you are in a medical emergency to get it recognized so that you can help make the appropriate medical decisions. I think it's the wave of the future. It's what I want for my son. But I think there is some work that needs to be done on an advocacy perspective to close some of those legal loopholes and get this recognized so that it does not become a barrier to medical care. The microboard is another great tool, I think, that can help with decision-making. The microboards that I have seen and I have helped run, the people on the microboard essentially become support for the person with a disability to where that person can call and look for support as they want to make decisions for themselves. And then on kind of the other end of the spectrum is guardianship and conservatorship for people who really need that support in all aspects of their life. And it's important to note that in some states, those are separate, and in some states, those are one and the same. So guardianship is guardianship of the person, saying, you know, I have the right to make medical decisions for this person. And conservatorship is guardianship of the finances. So again, some states, those are different. Some states, those are the same. Yes. So legal power of attorney, that's a great question. So the question is, what's the difference between guardianship and legal power of attorney? So a legal power of attorney says, hey, I grant you power of attorney to make decisions on my behalf. And it's durable, so you can make decisions for me at any time. But if I'm standing next to you and I say, you just said that you want me to go in to the dentist and get my teeth cleaned, and I'm not doing it, you cannot override me. Guardianship says, I don't have capacity to make my own decisions. Now, there are drawbacks to guardianship. You cannot drive if there's somebody has guardianship over your person. You cannot own a gun. You cannot vote. Now, there are exceptions. I do have clients who somebody else has guardianship of the person, and they have appealed in court to a judge to say, I still want them to be able to vote. And it has been allowed, but it is an exception. Absolutely. Exactly. So the question was, conservatorship would be the exact same relationship, but for financial decisions. And that's exactly right. So if it was legal power of attorney over the financial decisions, I could overrule you. But if it's a conservatorship, I can't overrule you. Depends on the state. Some states, you have to do both. Some states, it covers both. So the last one is my favorite because this is where everybody can start to look towards the future and really grow. And what I find with families is if you're so concerned about caring for your family and protecting them, it's very, very hard to get to a place where you can start thinking about the future and thinking about the things that really are exciting, taking a vacation, investing your money, setting personal goals. And this is the fun part. You know, I work with families who in 20 years, they've never taken a vacation, and getting to a point where they are supported enough that they can do it is really, really meaningful. Also making sure that your money is working for you. This is something that I see families, they're so afraid. It's that mentality of like, I've got to keep working, but also I can't take any risk. And so they don't. And the reality of life right now is that inflation is here, and we need to beat inflation to keep up purchasing power. And we need to be able to support 2 lifetimes, both our own and the generation after us. And so making sure that your money is working for you is really, really important. So if you've heard this too, I have a term up there. It's called a person-centered plan. And when I think of this, I think that's what's missing in a lot of special needs plans is a person-centered plan. This is taking into account the goals of every single member of the family. So this part is a spotlight on dividend investing. And the reason that I put this up is that when you're thinking about financial planning, what I love about dividends, first of all, they're very overlooked in today's market, but also you can set yourself up to where the dividends are reinvested over time and they're building stronger returns with less risk. But then you can take it to a place where when you're retired, you're actually living off of the income of your portfolio to leave that principle for the next generation. And I think that's a really powerful tool. So I have a team. So there's 3 of us. We're all moms. We are all moms of kids with disabilities. And we started this company together because we wanted this service and we could not find it. And so we built it. If you did work with us, we are looking at everything that I just talked about and working through all of those details. And rather than meeting with clients once a year, setting goals and then kind of forgetting about it until the next year, maybe you reach out for a question or two. We meet with our clients at least quarterly. And we have Dr. Kathy Matthews, who is a full partner. We're all equal partners. She is actually not a financial planner. She's a full-time advocate. And so she works with families with us to make sure that advocacy is a part of the plan and that you're able to reach goals and that any obstacles that are in your way that we can start to navigate around. So she's really an expert in government benefits. She attends IEP meetings. It's the service that we felt we would want. We wanted to provide for the families that we work with. So we do have a process because I'm a big believer in process and customized to the family, but following the specifics every time to make sure that nothing is overlooked. So thank you all. I'm so appreciative of you being here and welcoming me. We went through a lot of information. And I know you were asking questions as we went, but are there any more questions now? Yes. Doesn't need an ABLE account. So I would say money is money. So the question, I guess, would be if they were no longer disabled. So, okay. So I don't think there's a chance where you would outgrow an ABLE account because it's money that's there for the benefit of the loved one. I can't say for sure if it's the right tool for your family. Yeah. Yes.
Start out with $100, right? You do that.
Sure. There's no limit. I will say, and this is a hot button for me, is there's monthly fees on a lot of these ABLE accounts, and that drives me nuts. There's a monthly fee. It's $3. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're putting in $50 a month and $3 of that is taken out, that's 6%. Yes. Okay.
Insurance plans, things like that. I've heard from a financial planner that I could take out an insurance policy on my son and his wife, and then the granddaughter would inherit that. I just don't know what the smartest thing to do for grandparents who are looking to support their long term. I mean, we're all part of the family, right?
Yeah.
It's a village.
Completely. Working with grandparents is my favorite. So I'm so glad that you're looking into this. The answer is always it depends, but the first thing I would do is ask them if they've done any of their own legal planning and if they have a special needs trust set up. If they do have a special needs trust set up, then I would look at how do you want to fund that special needs trust? And do you want to fund it with your own assets, or do you want the money to go to the parents and then it's up to them? to fund the trust. If they don't have a special needs trust, and this is something where sometimes grandparents come and say, well, I really want to control this, so I'm going to set up my own trust, and then they can set one up separate. Some grandparents come and say, well, I'm setting this trust up for the benefit of my granddaughter, but obviously you're involved in this process, so come with me and let's do it together. And that is you've got to figure that out with your family. But I think going through that process and keeping that line of communication open with them is so huge. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
After 10 years, you change where that market where it's wrong. Given like this 2-year gap and everything, make that stay like that's in the able account. If you are 29, really, you're still, at the sort of option.
So in most states, a Roth or a 529 that was in the child's name would count as an asset to make them ineligible for government benefits. The ABLE would not make them ineligible. So if the goal is to protect and keep them benefits eligible, I would put the money into the ABLE. I went through that myself, thinking which one would be better. My son's not on government benefits today. He's on a wait list that he'll probably never get off of as long as I'm around. But we did end up going with the ABLE just because in the chance that he does really, an emergency comes up and he really needs those government benefits, I wanted him to be eligible. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
What parents are making tough to do, we found ourselves in a situation where my mother set up a vehicle when she sold her house to give money to grandchildren, and they set up a car that his money was going to special needs trust that was created by her, that we don't do that. We have spent a lot of time, I think we have our own special needs trust.
Yeah, to your point too, when you have two trusts, you're oftentimes doing something like purchasing a home that's owned for the beneficiary to live in. If you've got two trusts, you have to keep those separate. The money is separate. You have fewer options. So I always say, you have to do what's best for your family. You have to do what's right for you. I cannot say what the plan is, but keeping things simpler is a great goal in where we already live in a very complex world. I think, yes. Yes, in this setting, I think it will be tough to do that. I also think we have, is he still here? Is Ron still here? He just left, so got it. He's really the expert, but what I will say is there's a new commissioner of Social Security and Martin O'Malley, and he's made a lot of positive changes in this regard. So he's trying to make everything more transparent. And one of the changes that he's made is that as of September 30th of this year, before this, for a lease, you had to either show that somebody was paying their fair share of household expenses or that they were paying market rent. And if you were not paying your fair share of household expenses or market rent with that SSI benefit, then they were just going to automatically reduce your benefit. That is changing. As of September 30th, they are saying if you have a lease in place for at least $350 a month, and to go further into that, it's the full benefit rate divided by 3 plus $20 because it's the government. They can't do things simple. But as long as you've got that in place, that they will not deduct your benefit for that reason. So you no longer have to go through the fair share or the market rent calculation. So that might help. And if you want me to kind of look on your specific situation, because there's still a lot of factors that could influence that, but I'm happy to do that with you. Of course. Yes.
Can we go back to guardianship and conservatorship? So if you can have the conservatorship, then can you have a power of attorney and that other part? If you have a child who you think is going to drive, you wouldn't be able to drive. So you wouldn't do, is that what you're talking about? Like if you do guardianship, the person can't drive?
That's right. So if you have guardianship, the person cannot drive. So you're asking if.
But still give them any, so you want to definitely control the finances.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't, so you could do that in a separate way. But then you also want to have power of attorney so that if God forbid something happens, you can be there to make those decisions.
Yes. So I would. I would say first, it's always easier to start with less and then build up to more. Guardianship is not impossible to get out of, but it's much harder. So you do have to go in front of a judge and prove that someone is competent. So you in order to get the guardianship, you go in front of a judge and you prove that they're incompetent. You basically have to go in front of the judge and say, well, I was wrong. They're competent, and you have to be able to prove it. So it's just harder to do that way. In terms of like the magic cocktail, it depends on the state. Sometimes it depends on the county, unfortunately, and then figuring out the needs of the child. But I'd be happy to kind of talk through it with you in your specific situation. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Your one is sufficiently, one of the better word, high function. So that they will not be classified as disabled, even though they are completely Genesis. So they get no government benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a significant difference between a conventional trust you set up and trying to create some kind of special needs trust, or is essentially for a person like that, a trust is a trust?
It's the in-betweeners that are the hardest to plan for. So the question is, if somebody is, for lack of a better word, high functioning, and so is not eligible for government benefits, does not have a disability determination, but still needs support, financial support, is it better to have a regular trust or to still have a special needs trust? And I hate to say that it depends, but it does depend. Like some people will take the outlook of, well, you still might want to have that special needs trust in place because if there is an emergency, right? Like something happens to you and then your person is on the verge of homelessness or really things have deteriorated where they really need help. That special needs trust can help them get those waiver benefits faster than they would otherwise. There's another school of thought that says, well, they could always set up a first party special needs trust in that situation, and giving them a trust where they still have a trustee takes away a lot of the red tape, but still gives them some financial protections so that somebody out there is looking out for their best interests. That's a very highly personal decision. I don't think there's a best answer for it. Just what's right for your family and doing the best you can with the instruments that are out there. Yeah. Any other questions? I can. Mm-hmm. And sometimes what we do is we're looking and we're seeing maybe something was, if it was phrased differently or the focus was a little bit different, using different language that you could get them to where they're eligible for benefits. And sometimes it's not. But even then, I think that this is something that is, again, I hate to say starting to, because this is not a new problem, but there's more national attention. There's more people trying to solve the problem of those people who maybe they are driving, right? Maybe they don't need 24-hour supervision, but they still need help. And just kind of saying, oh, we'll leave it to mom and dad until they're no longer here is not a good option. All right, you guys. Okay.
I'm not sure my question is appropriate in this. But, this has to do, I guess, SSI and SDI.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's right. Oh, that's fine.
So not really. You know, there are budgeting apps that can be helpful. Some people just use a spreadsheet. That's probably what most people use, just a spreadsheet. I have one client who kind of uses the combination of a Google sheet so he can get it on his phone. And then he takes a picture and say he's got a folder just specifically for the pictures of the receipts. So that he can go in and he can take the picture and match it to the Google sheet and just do everything from the phone as it happens. I know that's not. Yes.
Both parents, that's listed in their private insurance. Split the equally among several children. I think with that. That with that talking about it.
Okay, so the question was if a parent or relative has life insurance with beneficiaries listed to go equally between children, and it goes to a special needs child without going to their trust, would that make them ineligible for government benefits, specifically Social Security or Social Security disability income, right? So, Social Security disability income, it wouldn't have no impact. For SSI, which is supplemental security income, there's a $2,000 asset limit. And for Medicaid waivers, so this is the home and community-based support program. Those waivers generally have a $2,000 asset limit. So I say this because, again, it's hard because we're talking to a nationwide group, and traditional Medicaid does vary state to state on the asset limit. So like in Virginia, if you're under 65 and you're receiving traditional Medicaid, you can have as many assets as you want. But if you're receiving a Medicaid waiver through the home and community-based supports system, it's a $2,000 asset limit. For SSI, it's $2,000 wherever you are. So if you have more than $2,000 that you've inherited, you're going to lose the waiver. Now, that could be terrifying depending on the state that you're in. In some states, it could be you lose a waiver and you get right back on it. In some states, there could be a decades-long wait list to get back on it. So, you know, yeah.
SCI, your kid is only eligible if you retire or pass away, right? Because they're on SSI first.
So right, if they don't have their own work record, then they can only be eligible for SSDI on someone else's record, which means that other person has to have retired or become disabled or deceased. Mhm.
So if they are, if they're working, they have to be under the 2,000.
And then under an income limit as well. Great question. Did everybody hear that? What she said, the question? You want me to repeat it? Okay. So what she said is, if you're receiving SSDI, how does that come through? Does it come through somebody else's benefit? And if you're receiving SSI, how can you continue receiving SSI if you're working? So on SSDI, if the person with a disability has never worked themselves, the only way that they could be eligible for SSDI, there's two things that have to happen. They have to be, let's see, I think it's disabled before the age of 26. 22, thank you. Disabled before the age of 22. So you should really come up and answer this. Disabled before the age of 22. And then they take the SSDI on a parent's record when the parent either becomes disabled themselves, retires and takes their own benefit, Social Security benefit, or they pass away. And then they can take SSDI. After 2 years of taking SSDI, they become eligible for Medicare, which is also can be a big deal. In our country, just saw statistics that 5% providers in our country accept Medicaid, 95% accept Medicare. So that can be a really big deal. And then for supplemental security income and keeping that benefit, there's income limits in each state, and you do have to be under that $2,000 asset limit. You can use the ABLE to stay under the $2,000 asset limit. There are, and Ron and I were talking about this extensively, there's a Ticket to Work program, and they're really working hard to expand that program to keep people benefits eligible who really need the supports, but also give them the ability to have a job. And obviously, I think that's extremely important. Yes. That's a great question. So the question was, what happens to the balance of an ABLE account when the beneficiary dies? And that answer is it completely depends. First of all, if they are receiving government benefits and they live in a state that has the Medicaid payback provision, then they're going to have to pay Medicaid back first. If they're not receiving government benefits, if they are competent, then they can name a beneficiary and it goes to that beneficiary. Yes. So I think I heard you're a frustrated parent and you're trying to get your child with ACC to save adult child. And you're meeting a lot of resistance.
Problem without it.
Yeah. There's a whole lot wrapped up into that, right? In order to save, in order to be able to do that, you have to be able to engage in future thinking. You have to have impulse control. And both of those things can be very hard for people with ACC or any disability, really. So that might be what he's experiencing. There's the only thing I can say is that there's ways to protect him so that even without a special needs trust, you could make sure there's somebody that can kind of make sure that he's provided for. But there's not much that you can do with him. Right. Yeah. Well, thank you all. You kept me busy.